While the newly mobilized forces are still on their way, the front line in the Luhansk region continues collapsing. The situation develops in an unforeseen way because the Ukrainians are achieving success in the area where they are at a tactical disadvantage. On September 15, the Russians started to conduct forced mobilization in the Luhansk region in order to mobilize at least 6,000 men to close the leaks and hold the front line for at least one more week. However, it seems like they failed to meet the quotas because the republics have already drained their resources and sent to the front every living man, so there are no men left to mobilize. As a result, their defense lines are being breached faster than they managed to build new ones behind. 2 days ago, as it turned out, the Russians were still controlling half of Novoselivka, Kharkivka and Karovyi Yar, although the last one was more like a gray zone. Today some Russian sources reported that the Ukrainians have already entered Kharkivka, Rydkadub and Nov. Ukrainian sources also add that the Russians have already started leaving Pisky, Malivka and Vysh-Solwan because of the high risk of being encircled. This indicates that the Russians did not prepare secondary defense lines and therefore did not have the possibility and resources necessary to repel Ukrainian attacks. And as you remember, these are fields. Such a progress implies that the Ukrainians not only managed to cross 5 to 10 kilometers across these fields but also then pushed the Russians out of their positions. This is an unbelievable defeat for the Russians, especially if we compare it to Lyman. Lyman is virtually surrounded, the Ukrainians here are attacking from the forest, so there is no way to catch them on the approaches. Lyman is also supplied via one road that is under total artillery control. The Russians in Lyman are at a disadvantage. In contrast, the Russians in Kharkivka, for example, had multiple supply roads. They had a lot of time to prepare their defense while the fights were still taking place in Studnok and Svitohursk. They had an empty field between them and their enemy, they had absolute tactical advantage, but they could not turn it into operational success. But why? What is the difference? The difference is in the forces that are being assigned to hold these positions. The difference is in the experience. The forces that are holding Lyman are the last available professional forces. As I told you previously, for the first several days the defense was held purely by the DPR and LPR troops. These men managed to repel the first most vicious and devastating Ukrainian attacks, which forced the Ukrainians to switch to Plan B and try to take Lyman into a pocket. The collapsing front line is under the responsibility of the regular Russian army, who do not have extensive combat experience, but even more importantly, they do not know the area very well, unlike the Ukrainians or DPR and LPR forces. That is why they could not at all turn their tactical advantage into operational success. And that is why the Russians tried to mobilize men in these republics, particularly in the Luhansk region, and the failure to achieve this objective might as well cost them the victory in the battle for Lyman. In the meantime, the Ukrainians continued developing a supporting attack from Kupiansk and Dvorykna. Today it was reported that the Ukrainians established control over Kupiansk-Vuzlovyi, a separate town located a little bit to the south. At first glance, the progress here is slow, and it seems like the Ukrainians here will in no way manage to contribute to the battle for Lyman. However, the density of settlements is the highest along the river near Kupiansk and Dvorykna. That is why the first several kilometers here are the hardest, but once the Ukrainians consolidate control over them, they will be able to significantly increase the territory under their control over a very short span of time. Overall, it seems like the Ukrainians decided to strike the Russians from the west, not the south, because the western part of the front line, even though more challenging, is defended by less skilled forces. If you are against the invasion of Ukraine and want to support the work that I am doing, consider making a purchase in the online store UA Supporter. Here you can find a lot of products with Ukrainian symbols, to not only show your support for this channel, but also for Ukraine.